Hello, and thank you for choosing the Shaggy Dog Philosopher. I am the Shaggy Dog Philosopher. Today I'm not wearing the hat because I don't feel like it, and also this was impromptu. So, my audience have already heard this part, but for the YouTube audience, I am going to be reading to you a book that I hate. In fact, I'm going to be reading from you two books that initiated the slow descent into madness, which resulted in me being a philosopher. When I picked up the first book I'm going to mention to you, I had no intention of being a Shaggy Dog philosopher. I had no intention of ever being a philosopher. I've talked about that a lot in a lot of different spaces. When I picked it up because I just wanted to read a ghost story. So, what we're going to do is I'm going to read from you from two books. I'm going to read you an excerpt and a chapter, maybe a couple of chapters. We'll see how long it takes me to get pissed off. Because what I'm going to try to do is I'm going to try to get real pissed off for you into this camera and see if I can't make a few bucks in tips. Get some subscriptions to the Patreon and be my most authentic, crazy self for you where you can see it. And just really unpack these books as intelligent people. I'm going to teach you how to do that. The first book that we're going to unpack is actually the second book in the series trilogy, House of Darkness, House of Light by Angela Perron. You don't know that you are already familiar with this story because Angela Perron is a cultist. That could get me sued. She is trying to create a cult around the events that happened in her life, but but more than that, the thing that you do know about her is that her story, her family, this book series, especially the first 100 pages or so of the first book in the trilogy, is the first The Conjuring movie. That family, that ghost story, is the House of Darkness, House of Light. So if you've watched that movie, you're ahead already in what we're going to be talking about. But you're going to be surprised about how I approach it and where we go and what I talk about. I promise you that. The second book that we're going to read from is by Jane Roberts. And that is going to become a series because I'm not going to be able to read this entire book to you in one sitting. So we're going to do that until we're done. I'm just going to sit and I'm going to read it into this live, and I'm going to break this up like I did my book one, Intellect and Consciousness, as best I can. It's going to be audio, and I can't edit a lot of video, but I'm going to do my very best. And this is just what I'm going to do until I'm not threatened with homelessness anymore. And then we'll see what my product looks like when we have found a way to get me in a studio where I can be really productive for you. The second book I'm going to read to you is Jane Roberts, the Afterdeath Journal of an American Philosopher. And it's a book I hate, and it is why I chose to Shaggy Dog philosophize. What happened is I sat down to read Angela Perron's book to give myself a palate cleanser because I like to read ghost stories and I like UFO stuff and I like New Age stuff as a palate cleanser intellectually, it's usually really easy to dismiss and see where they're coming from and then just move on. And so I had been interested, and I've talked about this elsewhere, but we'll talk about it. I had been interested in Angela Perron already. I already had an interest because The Conjuring movie, that first movie, is a horror movie that truly got to me. It's very effective today. I watched it after reading the first book, and it's still effective all these years later. That's a good movie. It's a quality, solid movie. And so I did what I do, and I came to being me by listening to a lot of podcasts, a lot of paranormal podcasts, a lot of religion podcasts, just you name it. And then what kept happening is I kept getting into interpersonal conflict with the creators that I didn't understand. And so I just started sitting down in front of a microphone, and here we are. And I still don't understand why I can't collaborate with the people in the spaces that I want to work in, but here we are. I'll just have to make my own. And that's fine. That's fine. What it is that I read the books. I read them myself. I don't just listen to what other people say about them and then tell you what other people said about them and then take the money that should go to those other people. What I do instead is I read the source material. And then if you read the source material long enough, it will make you crazy to try to relate it back to what people say about the source material. That will happen. And I can prove that if you really wanted to sit and look in my hard drive. I have a busted, just absolute mess of a PowerPoint presentation that I tried to put together for YouTube as a video essay, like everybody else does, on intellect and consciousness. And just trying to chase down the word consciousness, just trying to chase down intellect, brings you to it brings you naturally to Augustine, because Augustine built out the idea that we still use today of the mind's eye. And if you look for that, what you're going to find is a lot of PhD students telling you that it's in De Trinitate, but it's not in De Trinitate. It's in City of God, and furthermore, it's in I have swollen my in the Twitter, and I can't remember the name of his other book now. His Confessions, I think is what it's called. That's where the mind's eye stuff is. He's talking about how he can't get over the loss of his best friend because he lives in his mind's eye. And so he's talking about how thoughts relate to action in a really profound and beautiful way. And everybody just wants to throw those books away because they're too religious. And I'm like, what are you talking about? How is De Trinitate less religious? And that's irrelevant, but it's really not, because what happened is I wanted to turn to how I wanted to begin at how, not New Age, but postmodernism has broken your ability to think in a cromulent way. And so I looked to William James, because William James predicted postmodernism and he named it. William James names postmodernism in either one of his essays or one of his collections of speeches. I think it's the collection of speeches, the varieties of religious experience. But anyway, he's talking to the Scottish school, and what postmodernism has done is it's taken the extreme everything is true of rationalism and it's applied it to everything. And it said that you, as a pragmatic individual, get to decide what's real and what's true and what words have what meaning, and you get to decide everything that used to be decided by groups of holy men and the most intelligent people in the world. Because William James was writing in full belief that the 20th century was going to be a century of enlightened geniuses, where public education was going to work and everyone was going to be and act like me. And he's insane. And then what happened is that postmodernism bled into metamodernism, and all of that got married up in the I am cult of Guy Ballard. And then all of that plus feminism spawned Jane Roberts. Jane Roberts wrote a lot of books and invented a cult, reaches all the way back, because everybody is going to Gabriel in the 20th century. Everybody's reaching to Gabriel, Michael, the angels. They're reaching toward angels to have a deeper antiquity than Jesus. And so she, in her being clever, she reaches all the way back and she gets Seth. Because what you don't know, because you haven't studied your Bible closely enough, is that Adam and Eve had 3 sons. They had a third son. They had a lot of kids, but they had a third son. His name is Seth. And Seth sets the foundation for all of the apocalyptic Judaism for the rest of history, but especially that leads into the Gnostics at the Nag Hammadi library. Those people called themselves Sethian Gnostics. They didn't call themselves Gnostics, but they called themselves Sethian Jews. So what Jane Roberts did is Jane Roberts decided that, well, if Aleister Crowley is allowed to have these visionary experiences where he speaks in tongues. That's called glossolalia, where he speaks nonsense, and then people believe that that nonsense means something, and then he gets to write books claiming that that nonsense meant something. Well, so can I, because I'm a woman, and women can do anything that men can do, and she's not wrong about that, in fact. And so what she's going to do is she's going to pretend like Seth is speaking to her, that God's most favorite of Adam's sons is the one speaking to her. And the way he's doing it is by allowing her to channel William James' ghost so that she can contradict everything William James wrote because she didn't like it. And so we're going to get into that by reading how I came to Jane Roberts, because I found it all very upsetting. I still find it all. I find it so very upsetting that I read the first House of Darkness, House of Light book in 5 days. It's like 500 pages, and I just broke it up into 100-page sections and banged it out. And then I got, what page am I on? I got to page 21 of the second book and was just so thoroughly sick of the lies and the contradictions and the back talking and the that I became this thing that you know me as now. So 11 minutes in, I've spent 4 minutes longer than I should have on an introduction because I'm disorganized and because this is a fucking huge and heavy topic. I'm going to just begin cold. This is one of the things that Angela Perron does. We're in House of Darkness, House of Light, the second book. One of the things that she does is she tells you outright in the first book, but she wants you to take this book seriously as a work of scholarship. And so she borrows a lot of medieval and 19th century scholarship tropes, which is an evidence of her amateurishness, which is, it became a pathology for me. That a lot of her the way she treats scholarship became pathological for me. And don't be like this. This was bad in the 19th century, and this is why we don't still do it. But one of the things she does is she has a lot of quotes. She does these pre and post chapter quotations, and then she has parts, right? Books within the book. And each one of them has a series, usually 2, of quotations, and those will be a longer quotation. And so I had never heard of Jane Roberts. Just never heard of her. But I'm reading book 1, and I'm like, there's a source material for all of this worldview. Angela Perron and her mother, Carolyn, did not cobble all of this together. You can't claim to be scholastic and then also claim to be mystical and doing wisdom. So this didn't come from nowhere. And so between the end of page XXI 21 and page 1 and part 5, there are 2 quotes. One of them is a poem, and the second one is Jane Roberts, my initiation into Jane Roberts. And then I'm going to read for you the first chapter of House of Darkness, House of Light. And then we're going to transition, probably not very seamlessly, into Jane Roberts. Here goes. Quote, all of this is quote, "Everything is energy, and that's all there is to it. Match the frequency of the reality you want, and you cannot help but get that reality. It can be no other way. This is not philosophy. This is physics." That quotation is by someone named Daryl Anka, who's someone I'd never heard of. And then I turned the page to this quote. "In that moment of trust, he and his experience are transformed. Looking around, he can see glimpses of that trust trying to rouse itself in the religions and sciences alike. But he understands that for all their merits, institutions can speak only generally to any given individual, and that each man's life involves him in a direct confrontation with the universe in which he must ultimately trust both his own nature and the unknown source which it springs. That greater source makes itself known through the living person, in his living and his dying and speaks directly through his own nature. Only that trust can illuminate and make sense of the facts of the known world. It is ultimately impossible to trust God and distrust the self, and vice versa. That quote is Jane Roberts, but that quote is Jane Roberts claiming to be channeling the fucking ghost of William James. That is the Afterdeath Journal. You cannot write a journal after your death. That cannot be done. Can't be done. I know that can't be done because Harry Houdini did an experiment about this, wherein he told his wife a secret word that he would whisper into her ear in a seance because she was a believer and he was decidedly not. And yeah, she never got that word. It just didn't happen. You don't write books after you die. Books can be posthumously published that you penned, but this is also a person who's covering for Nietzsche. And I've already written and I've already done a space about how Nietzsche's sister, feminism plus really fucking stupid ideas equals trains. Now we move to part 5 of... You should see my facial expressions, by the way, Twitter audience. I'm making some ugly expressions to the YouTube audience. We moved to... I forgot the name of this book. We moved to part 5 of House of Darkness, House of Light, which she titled Ghostly Cries and Whispers. And it opens, like they all do, with an open chapter quote. And I'm telling you, these open chapter quotes get tedious. Oh my goodness. Quote, "Be sober, be vigilant, because your adversary, the devil, as a roaring lion walketh about, seeking whom he may devour." End quote. Peter, volume 8 is how she actually has it written. And now we just are going to read Angela Perron's own words. "Sensory perception is a wondrous gift of nature." She capitalizes nature because she refuses to say God. So in her feminist antagonism to Christianity, she refuses to refer to God in masculine, uppercase names or appellations, and will use nature capitalized. We'll get to why. Continuing. "Those who listen to the whispers of spirit will be tenderly guided along, while those who deliberately provoke the dead know not what they may receive in response. It requires an inordinate amount of courage, coupled with morbid curiosity. There is such a thing as begging for trouble. It seems to obey any request as if by command. The children had been forewarned. They'd been unwilling to listen to reason, to voices of authority, far more susceptible to absurd notions and suggestions made by friends. There would be consequences, ellipses, for every action a reaction, science as equation. Disobedient heathens get what they deserve. You asked for it, girls. There is an indistinguishable line between bravery and stupidity." And then she does a paragraph break and a center alignment and fucking quotes herself. "Be watchful, be prudent, be wise, be gone." I hate this so much. "Their odyssey began as a pronouncement, the sad diminutive clarion call." She uses that word clarion call about 700,000 times. "In hushed and somber tones, this communication, disguised as wind and rain, cloaked by the creaking of old clapboard, infiltrated the senses of those who had entered unfamiliar territory. In the quiet darkness of night, they'd listen to the farmhouse, its whistling coos or high-pitched whining, whenever an ill wind passed through the eaves, or so they had all presumed. The busy and rambunctious household was a distraction during their days, but at night the house spoke of its story to newly arrived inhabitants. During their first few months in residence, there was so much buzz and extraneous activity, the dismissal of uncommon noises was the norm." Now here I've highlighted this. I've highlighted this in my copy because we're in part 5 And now we're back to the first few months in residence. Now, this isn't my place where I'm going to rip this book apart. I should have already done that for you, but I got way in my head about it. But we're in part 5. You cannot imagine my frustration with 500 pages, only to open page fucking 1 and we're back into the first few months. There was so much buzz and extraneous activity, the dismissal of uncommon noises was the norm. An adjustment period was necessary, and no one in the family trusted their own perceptions of this house. A new place, new noises. Mindset explained away virtually every strange and foreign sound. The house was so big in comparison to where they had come from that the tightly compact Cape Cod and Cumberland now seemed as a distant memory, something no bigger than a beach bungalow. Sound was magnified and distorted within the massive structure. It was an echo chamber. It had a heartbeat. The house had an energy and a voice all its own. Several, in fact. The interplay of shadow and light intermingling with its natural, supernatural sound became mesmerizing, a sound of wonderment. They had willingly crossed the threshold, entering into the shared space, one filled with secrets and souls. Into a mysterious portal they ventured, finding it hypnotic by nature, casting its enchanting spells on those dwelling within its clapboard walls. There was no escaping the effect it had on a family who could not help but listen up and smoke. Attention, class! Mere mortals could not ignore the gauzy haze gathering in rooms masquerading as moonlight, cloud cover hovering, and shadow dance, an elegant disguise. Nature provided a cloak for an esoteric element of itself. Ellipses. Very clever camouflage. That's one fucking paragraph. That's one fucking paragraph. All of that, from their odyssey to camouflage, is a wall of text on the page. I hate it. I hate it so much. Yet, there is no mistaking the cry of a child. Cindy would soon identify the face of the littlest ghost wailing for her mother. The moans seeping from deep within the eaves were, after some research, presumed to be the sick and pitiful sound made by Johnny Arnold, a man in the self-inflicted throes of a poisonous death. Now, see, I highlighted that because this pisses me off. I gotta. Oh, sorry, I got a comment. I need to be aware of those. Anyway, this is a good time to check that comment, and this pisses me off. I highlighted that because this pisses me off. This name dropping Johnny Arnold bullshit. We're in book 2, okay? I want to be very clear. We're in book 2. Who the fuck picks up book 2 of a haunting story before book 1 from a self-published author? Who the fuck does that? And why the fuck have we started over? Oh my God. You just can't know how tedious and painful book 1 is. It's all like this. It's actually worse. It's much more purple. It's fucking horrible. It's a horrible experience. It's just awful. But this name drop bullshit, Johnny Arnold, she says that shit like she's told that story in book 1. She hadn't. She said his fucking name in like page 2, and then he never shows up again in book 1. So she's doing this shit. It's fucking annoying. I told you I was going to get mad. I wanted to do this to get mad because people think I'm funny when I yell. So this whole Johnny Arnold, a man in self-inflicted throes of a poisonous death. Yeah, fuck her. What that's about is if you know the witch, the Bell Witch story. If you know the Bell Witch story, all she's doing is hooking you like, oh, the Bell Witch got him. Yeah, fuck you. Fuck you. Just because I know that story doesn't mean yours is good. We're returning. He, Johnny, suffered, departing life in excruciating pain, a haunting, desperate sound, as if he attempted to muffle his agony so to avoid detection. Was he unwilling to risk discovery before the deed was done? Soon enough, chanted incantations would begin. Whispered words, barely perceptible, over time became audibly intelligible. The distinctly articulate statements made no sense at all to the child suddenly struggling just to be a child, striving to grasp and interpret the cryptic pleas to determine a source. Okay, now I didn't highlight this, but again, we're in the fucking Bell Witch story. And again, I'm not going to get better once we move to Jane Roberts. I just want you to see just exactly what this is going to be like. Because Jane's going to get it worse. This isn't the place to rip Andrea apart. Cynthia heard the call of 7 dead soldiers buried in the wall. Come to me, little girl. Telepathic messages conveyed within the sealed mind field. That's how it's highlighted big like that. I can't show you the page every time, but of sounds surrounding each recipient, altering their state of being, hyphenated. During these encounters, what Cynthia often describes as being in the bubble, all external activity was deflected as a spirit shielded itself, protected from any intrusion. It soon became apparent to 5 children listening with new ears, observing with new eyes. Ellipses. They were not alone. They were never alone and would not ever be again. Such disturbing interludes were enlightening in this respect. And I'm not going to read that whole thing. I read that and I said, what the fuck is going on here? What is up with this prose? Who writes like this? And the answer, as I've already said, but thank you. I have a viewer on YouTube now. And thanks for sticking around, Bo. It's good to see you. The answer is that she got this purple prosaic horse shit from Jane Roberts. And so now being done with Andrea Perron, so I don't get myself fucking sued, I'm going to read Jane Roberts, who's, her, what's it called? Your estate? Her estate's probably even more litigious. We begin. Again, Jane Roberts, the Afterdeath Journal of an American Philosopher. That American philosopher is William James. And I don't like that guy. That's the other thing. I don't want to have to defend this guy. I fucking don't like that guy. Introduction. 1. Front door, hyphenated. People, back door, hyphenated. People, and worldviews, 2 words. All of this is idiosyncratic language. That's why I'm pointing it out to you. Idiosyncratic language is important. If we're going to read these things, idiosyncrasies in the way people arrange their words and the way they form their words are hugely important to you as a reader. We continue. Actually, we quote. I find myself with still another unconventional manuscript. Now, if you haven't read, I'm going to do this a lot. If you haven't read Either Or by Kierkegaard, you won't know why she thinks she's being clever by opening this way. Left at the back door of my mind. Yeah, fuck you. The pages fluttered down into my awareness one by one, as if left by some invisible newspaper boy, day after day, semicolon, in fact. The latest installments in a steady line of communications that seemed to come from strange lands. Without painting this analogy in too glowing colors, I'd like to point out my feeling that the conscious mind is like a house of awareness, with an elegant front door through which we receive usual callers and messages. I'm cutting it again. This, again, is Hebrew language. She is borrowing so much from what is already going on in the Hebrew biblical tradition. It's very annoying. Because in the 60s and 70s, 80s, 90s, this woman wrote a lot, and for a long time. I think this book is from 77, 76. I should have already given you that information. I make a habit of doing that and then didn't do it for you. This 78. This book was 78. It was much more common in 78 to have read your Bible, to have read the whole fucking thing from front to back. It was much more common. And so when she's doing stuff like house, she's borrowing from Hebrew bet, and she's talking about Bathsheba at all times. And the reason I know she's talking Jane Roberts, I go into Jane Roberts with that bias. I know that because if you've seen The Conjuring, that's what Andrea Perron throughout the House of Dark, House of Light blames on literally the entire canon of Ed Warren's career. The Ed and Lorraine Warren. She literally, by the end of book 1, has blamed everything that they experienced. That's the just to pick one, because I can't remember all of their names. That's the Amityville house. They're saying that the Conjuring movie was not just a precursor in time, because Amityville was later in time, the next in time, in fact, but that it was the same haunting. It was the same entity that caused Amityville, and also that caused the Enville haunting, I think is what it's called in England. Anyway, just everything that what Andrea is claiming is that Bathsheba is haunting the Warrens for fucking up the Conjuring movie, whatever. And she got the idea from Jane Roberts, and it's early. You can see it early right here when she says I would like to point out my feeling that the conscious mind is like a house of awareness is Hebrew ideology. That's bet whatever. And awareness is what William James calls consciousness. With an elegant front door through which we receive usual callers and messages. Parenthetical. Hello, how are you? State your name and business. Close parenthetical. This front entrance is swept and well tended. To its doorstep come all official magazines and newspapers. The shrubs of our beliefs are trimmed and pruned, and the regular mailman whistling cheerfully leaves the mail at the proper anticipated times. Neat, curtained windows look out to the well-organized streets of the world, and we're told that all messages must come to us through that front door, the only entrance or exit. But no matter what we're told by all the officials and authorities, we seem to remember a secret back door from the time of our childhood, a magic entrance that we discovered when we were left by ourselves, perhaps on rainy afternoons, a door that opened into other worlds. Vaguely, we may recall finding and opening that door on innumerable, nearly forgotten occasions. We may have sensed messengers coming and going. Once or twice, we may even have found strange packages or papers on the back door stoop, wet with rain, as if they'd been waiting there for a long time. But the next time we look, the door is invisible. The wall of awareness is smooth, and we see only the whitewashed walls we've been taught to expect. There's a melancholy to this, because she was diagnosed with severe and crippling depression before she found cult. You need to know that, but you shouldn't. Some of us are just too stubborn and curious to ignore those unofficial events, so symbolically speaking, at least. While I keep my front door well tended, I've learned to watch at the back door of my mind. Now and then I stand on the mind's back porch, and sometimes I take a few tentative steps down unofficial paths that lead to unexplored psychological lands that just might correlate with other realities than the one we know. The Afterdeath Journal of an American Philosopher was automatically delivered then, at the back mental doorstep, the installments appearing day after day, while I went about my business. Winter turned to spring, and the regular magazines and papers brought by the postman kept me up to date on the official world. In 1978, it was much more common to understand what she meant when she says that this was automatically written. What that means is that she's claiming to have gone into a trance state, and then to have come out of that trance state with words on a page that she doesn't have any conscious memory of having channeled or have written down. I also make that claim very frequently about my work. Sometimes it's like that, sometimes it's not. She's going to go into what it means and how it works. But in this introduction, she is being decidedly anti-apologetic in her work, and what that means is she in Andrea Perron's insistence on being medieval in her scholarship is actually an insult that was leveled at Madame Helena P. Blavatsky in the 19th century. And so Andrea's attempt to be medieval is a regression to that insult because Jane Roberts was being meta-modern in her scholarship and refusing to be medieval. And what that means is that she doesn't apologize for the work. She starts in the work at the middle with assumptions that you know what's going on because she's writing to a cult. She's writing to an audience who already know. So the reason that Angela Perron starts book 2 back at the beginning is because she's writing to people who don't know they're in a cult yet and don't know that they're going to get the story told to them from the beginning in a different way. Jane here is assuming that you haven't read William James, specifically that you haven't read the book that she is going to title for you and that I won't spoil again in the text. So I'm going to read that paragraph or some of that paragraph again. I'm going to read the whole paragraph again. The Afterdeath Journal of an American Philosopher was automatically delivered then at the back mental doorstep. The installments appearing day after day while I went about my business. Winter turned to spring, and the regular magazines and paper brought by the postman kept me up to date on the official world. That's a terrible sentence. And so instead of what I mean by apologizing is instead of saying, hey, look, I'm not a very good writer, but this experience happened to me and I'm going to capture it for you the best way possible, what she's doing is insisting that she is, in fact, a very good writer and that she's going to overwrite to prove it to you. And so all of these commas, all these sentence fragments, bad writing, and it evidences that she's not what she's claiming. But we'll get to that. Those periodicals are easy to read, the ones that arrive at the front door. They're written for the front door people. But we're all both front door people and back door people. And what she means is that we're all people who can think rationally, but we're all people who have intuition, whether we know it or not. The trouble is that we know how to read the important news that comes to us through the exterior world, but often we just don't know what to do with the equally valid messages that come by the unofficial back route. And we all know this isn't true. People wouldn't rely on their backdoor routes. People wouldn't rely on their intuitions. People wouldn't rely on mysticism. People wouldn't get stoned. People wouldn't get drunk if they felt like they could rely on the information that is bombarding them from the outside world. She has to be wrong in her first principles. And by paragraph, this is probably paragraph 6, 3 of page 2, and it's not even page, yeah, it's officially page 2. Yeah, by paragraph 6, she's already just wrong. So paragraph 7. For one thing, the messages left by inspiration or the intuitions are highly personal, intimate, left at our back doorstep and no other, and they have to be read by the part of the mind that is peculiarly, that's a word I'm just never going to get right, suited to their translation. They may deal with symbols, for example, instead of the good clear alphabets we're used to. Sometimes their messages may even seem to contradict the news that comes in from the front door, and not only can't we confirm the data with our neighbors, but we have to restructure our own thinking before we can even accept it ourselves. And so what she's saying is that sometimes there's information that comes across your dashboard that's so profound that it's actually life-changing. And not just life-changing, it actually changes the way you filter all future information. She said that in a really cumbersome and unwieldy way because what she's trying to do is subtly make you think you're smart by reading someone writing a lot of overwritten bullshit. So at first I didn't know how to interpret the present manuscript either, she says. That's not me saying that. Should it be taken literally or symbolically? I tried to put together my knowledge of reality as it comes to me through official and unofficial sources of information, and to use all of my intellectual and intuitive abilities to find the answer. Our ordinary consciousness is tuned toward our front door callers, and when our physical senses are stimulated, the front doorbell rings and we respond to whomever or whatever wants our attention. Usually we're so busy responding to those messages that if the back doorbell rings, we don't notice. I've learned to tune my consciousness toward the back of my mental house and always to keep a portion of my attention focused in that direction. And I want to repeat for the YouTube audience, you can very clearly tell when I'm reading. I'm not going to quote unquote in and out of this. I am not saying these things. In a manner of speaking, I have my own messenger from those unknown psychological realms. Like many people, my husband, Rob, and I have a small yard in the rear of our house. But beyond that, there are hills and forests. In my analogy, these represent the unofficial areas of the psyche, down whose natural untended banks rush winds from our other psychological skies and messages tumbling like small speckled exotic stones. My trance personality, Seth, comes into my consciousness from other inner landscapes. Twice a week, he comes through my mind's back door and takes an honored place in our living room. I go into trance and he begins to speak, while Rob takes notes. Seth writes his own books in this fashion, explaining the greater realms of consciousness that exist outside our cozy villages of mind. Seth does not write his own books in this way. It was in the middle of one such session, the 717th, for November 4, 1974. Now, if you think I'm prolific, just imagine claiming to have written 717 messages. Now, that's a message a day, and you'll see that not all of these messages are particularly long. And if you looked at my journal, I've probably got that many. But think about that. Think about opening a book at the introduction with message 717 from your fictional god. What that does is that hooks a particular kind of seeker. And that particular kind of seeker is somebody who's really, really, really well-meaning and really beautiful, but really ignorant, really dumb, really, really makes bad choices with their headspace and who they allow to be in it. And I feel sympathy for them. I do. Because, I've been that guy. I'm sure that Elaine Pagels made me look like that guy circa 2009. I believe it. I believe that about myself, I mean to say. I have forgotten what I was talking about, though, where I was reading. It was in the middle of one such session, the 717th, for November 4th, 1974, that I first became acquainted with William James, the well-known American psychologist and philosopher who died in 1910, 64 years earlier, for those of you who don't want to do the mental math. He'd been dead for 4 generations and a third. That's long enough that nobody had read him in a long time that wasn't a psych student. A really long time. Because by the time I was in college in 2005, I did 6 weeks of college in 2005, and I attended Psych 101 as a senior in high school in 2004. William James was a footnote on psychology. This is what happened, she continues to say. Mentally, she saw a small paperback book open midway through, and I knew that it was titled The Varieties of Religious States. Now, I need you to be very, very clear. His book is titled The Variety of Religious Experiences. States is later. He didn't have that language. Cognitive states is that's not language that he had. At first, the book, she continues, was in miniature, but it grew larger so that I could read it clearly, sentence by sentence. At the same time, I knew that somehow the book was written by William James. I was already familiar with James' name, since several years previously I'd partially skimmed his Varieties of Religious Experience. As I have told you, breaking in again. She is telling you that she is cold reading you. You need to know that. She is admitting to cold reading you. The Varieties of Religious Experience is a book that Rob really enjoyed, though I didn't, she says, particularly. James's reputation as a psychologist also came up in our reading matter now and then. I explained to Rob what was happening. Then, while he took notes, I read out loud the pages I saw. We both took it for granted that the image of the book in my mind's eye was symbolic, but the message I read was quite literal and literate. We're going to pause again. Has anybody ever been able to read anything in a dream? Isn't it a trope of dreams that you can't read in dreams? Isn't that's my understanding, is that the rules sort of dreams are that you can't read. Even in what are those called? Lucid dreams, you're not allowed to read. That's what I hear. She continues, I found James more personally likable from these passages than I did from the real book of his I'd read. That's what's going to happen when you invent a guy. More than this, I felt that the copy itself also contained James's emotions and feelings, which were somehow played back when you read the words. Now, here's the thing. When she calls it copy, she's talking in Mad Men speak. She's talking in advertising speak. She's talking in 1970s investor class speak, which means she's talking in her husband's secret language, folks. She's talking to cultists. She's making money. She's making big money. Big money. This wasn't all, she continues to say. As described in my own book, her book, Psychic Politics, during that same session, that's just going to be hard for me to say. Deal with it. Other material also came through, supposedly from another dead psychologist, Carl Jung. So, that's where she got her states talk from. I was intrigued by James' quaint, rather elegant prose, and rather taken aback by the uneven exuberance with which the Jung material showed itself. Now, here's the thing. William James can't write Jung, and even if Jung is who she means by the prose, Dream Jung can't have written it either. So what she's doing is that thing that you see a lot of women do on Twitter in the writing space, where they go, oh, my writing was good to me. Yeah, your writing would be good to you. Mostly, my front door mind was startled by the implications of the entire affair, she continues to say. So we just let the whole thing slide by. Seth didn't. He instantly began a series of sessions on, quote, world views, end quote, 2 words. Briefly stated, Seth. Now, here's the thing. William James hyphenated worldview and gave it caps, initial caps, worldview. Briefly stated, Seth says that the feelings and experiences of each person continue to exist after death, and that these can be perceived under certain conditions. In other words, each of us has a unique version of reality that makes up our own private worldview. This is not just a passive perception of multidimensional properties, but an active, volatile phenomenon that interacts at many levels with other worldviews and combines with them. I'm going to read that sentence again because that's fucking nonsense. This is not just a passive perception of multidimensional properties, but an active, volatile phenomenon that interacts at many levels with other worldviews and combines with them. Hey, let's do that thing that I always tell you I'm never going to do and that I don't like doing. Let's be a real pedantic dick, and let's prove that I know what the fuck I'm talking about something random. String theory was real popular in the 70s. Yeah, my computer, this is the real reason I don't like to do this. My computer's not very good. I'm very, very poor, folks, and approaching imminent homelessness. Well, let's see. 1970, string theory is created. 1971, supersymmetry is created. So I'm not being a dickhead when I say that, but 1978, she has a very good reason to believe that she's still on the cutting edge enough that she can talk about this and not be noticed by the mainstream enough that she shut the fuck down, because she lives in 78, not 2020. She's able to publish to a much smaller audience of people who already know they want her books, people who've already pre-ordered because she's in a cult and a book club. You can do that back then. So, where was I? Seth didn't, right? People who read the New York Times, must first have an interest in that particular paper and must then take steps to buy it or have it delivered. Is this true? I know that it's decidedly not true in the internet age that you don't have it's decidedly untrue that you are required to have an interest in anything that you put your eyeballs on, because so many things come across your eyeballs in so many misleading and misdirecting ways that you could find yourself on a New York Times article without really wanting to be, having a pre-existing disinterest in New York Times, and be hitting that paywall telling you to give them money even though you already don't like it. So is that true? Maybe in 78 it's true that you have to have a pre-existing interest in order to read the New York Times, but I feel like you can go to a library and read the New York Times without having an interest. I feel like you can just I feel like you can find the source credible whether you want them to continue making money or not. Taking an interest in something means that you're willing to watch it grow with your money. So I don't know that that's true. So we're going to read it again because I lost somebody by reading that line or arguing with it. People who read the New York Times must first have an interest in that particular paper and must then take certain steps to buy it or have it delivered. Does she mean colloquially read? Does she mean regularly read? Because if she means regularly read, fine, whatever. They also probably have some interests and characteristics in common with other people who read the same paper. Probably not, actually. Probably beyond broad demographic. But again, she's talking advertising language and she's trying to connect it to string theory. And she's not going to succeed because string theory is horseshit, and advertisers, I don't even have to be Bill Hicks to tell you, are among the world's worst people. So if she's trying to make a religion for advertisers, she's already lost me, and it's already going to piss me off. So, according to Seth, she continues, certain worldviews are perceived by people whose interests, desires, or characteristics somehow fall into the same general area as the particular worldview involved. Still, I, Jane Roberts, found the entire matter of messages from the famous dead hard to take, worldviews or no. While Seth continued to dictate his book, The Unknown Reality, I finished my own Psychic Politics and started a sequel to my novel, The Education of Oversoul 7. She began her career as a shitty L. Ron Hubbard feminism knockoff. That's just fact. Then, once again, the unexpected happened, and this time it was triggered by a domestic event. I asked Rob what he wanted for Christmas of 1975. He answered, a book on Cézanne, meaning Paul Cézanne. I think that's how you pronounce his name. The French artist who died at the beginning of the century, that is, the beginning of the 20th century. 2 mornings afterward, unable to sleep, I got up and went to my typewriter. To put it mildly, the signals started flying. Beginning that dawn, I received an entire manuscript, The Worldview of Paul Cézanne, which was published by Prentice Hall in 1977. In this case, my love for Rob and my desire to get him what he wanted merged with my knowledge of my mind's greater resources. I sent out my unconscious message and turned into precisely what I wanted, yet I was never consciously aware of making any such efforts at all. What was delivered to my mind's back door was a view of the world as seen through an artist's eyes, and Cézanne, at least as he appears in the manuscript, didn't care for much beside painting. The book was devoted to the meaning of art, its greater implications and technique. My Cézanne didn't care what happened to the world since his time. He said nothing about life after death. His focus was undeviating, unique, and carried the indelible stamp of his personality, which is bothersome to me because none of this is how ghosts acted before her. This is just not how ghosts used to act before. I said her. I don't mean Jane Roberts. I meant Madame Blavatsky. Nobody was having these experiences with ghosts. What they're trying to do is rip right out of the Iliad and the Odyssey the funerary cult practices of shamans and mystics. And they're trying to divorce all of it from drugs. And they're trying, well, not really. She was a barbiturate. She died a severe barbiturate addict, painkiller addict. Maybe not opioids. People think that that one is better than the other because we still use barbiturates in mental health, but barbiturates make you retarded. They make your brain stop working when you've been on them long enough. And if you stop, you'll just drop dead. There is no withdrawal. It's just death. And I know I'm no longer speaking to the live YouTube audience. 50 minutes of my wandering is pretty impressive. Bo, love you, buddy. I got to remember where I was. When Cezanne was finished, I got back to the matter at hand, my sequel to Seven. I'd put the James episode out of my mind. Then one afternoon in May 1976, thoughts of James suddenly began intruding as I worked on my own book. I thought myself feeling some very definite emotional connections with James, as if, God forbid, we were reincarnationally involved or had some background in common. I say God forbid because reincarnation is one of those subjects that I agree with in theory, with certain changes such as the existence of simultaneous time, but have trouble with in practical terms. I shook my head, frowning at myself. The idea was too pat, too obvious, a psychic cliche. So I put my feelings aside and went back to my writing. But again, Seth didn't let me get away with it. That night at our regular session, instead of dictating his own book, Seth delivered some excellent material on the nature of consciousness. And Rob, knowing my attitude, grinned often as he watched me while Seth spoke about my relationship with William James. The implications of that session are fascinating, though, and important to all of us, as Seth traces the ever-changing patterns of human consciousness and desire. It was a warm, humid evening. The house and neighborhood were still as Seth began to speak. As usual, Rob took notes. The following is a verbatim account of that previously unpublished session. Introduction 2. Seth on William James and the Affiliations of Consciousness. Session 775, May 10, 1976. 9:36 p.m. Monday. What would be interesting would be to see if May 10th, 1976 wasn't in fact a Monday. I know that I just got another live member and that I say I'm doing a reading. Bear with me. We're doing philosophy too, so that means we're going to do a little bit of exegesis as we read. And I apologize if my tone is condescending. What did I want to know? I wanted to know whether May 10th, 1976 was in fact a Monday. It was. Hey, just a little bit of basic detective work. I do want to destroy this by the end, but I also want to leave most of that destruction to you. So just show you a little bit of how exegesis works, right? Just take a few seconds. This begins on a parenthetical that's also italicized, so that means that it's a conversation that she's claiming is verbatim. I feel Seth around, Jane said at 9:33. She laughed. On William James, unfortunately. I just got a glimpse of what Seth's going to say, and I thought, now how are you going to make sense of that? Jane's reaction came about because earlier this evening she'd caught herself thinking that she might be reincarnationally related to James, an idea that she'd rejected at once. Yet there was her worldview material on James. Whereupon I suggested that she just forget about it and see what Seth had to say. Not that we hoped she would turn out to be connected to James. That idea was too coincidental for our tastes. But it would be interesting to know why she'd found herself thinking along those lines to begin with. Seth always refers to Jane as Rupert and to me as Joseph, our entity names. Before we continue, Rob, buddy, you protest too much. You just do. But, on 2 pages you say 3 times that she rejected reincarnation. Clearly she didn't. Clearly she was delighted by the idea, because all of these women are delighted by the idea that they might have been a man who was important once. It gives them implicit authority. Blah. Continuing. I fucking hate this, by the way. If you don't know that, I fucking hate it. Good evening, Seth. Rupert can attest to his own identity, In ordinary terms, he counts his identity as beginning at the time of his birth in 1929. This is Seth speaking. And he sees it as reaching through to the present. In those terms, he has a time history with letters, mementos, snapshots, and so forth to prove it. He met you at a certain point in space and time. You both agree upon this and upon the continuity of your two identities. So Rupert can attest that he is himself. The true story of consciousness has not been written, for it will always, in essence, escape such description. In our early sessions, I spoke as simply as possible, and yet those sessions also contain in their own way the kernels of much that appeared later, and that has not yet happened. Early, I used the term fragment personality, simply to give you this idea that identity was not a unit that could be easily defined. And here we're going to break in. And Seth and Jane can kiss my ass. You don't get to start a book. You just don't get to start a book on it. Well, I said in another book. And then just, no, that's just not how life works. It's not how scholarship works. You don't get to skip so many steps by having it channeled by a dead guy. You just don't get to do that. It's very upsetting to me. Our later material led even further away from the concept of an easily defined self. All consciousness is interrelated. It flows together in currents, rises and falls, eddies and breaks, mixes and merges. In this great interplay, however, each identity, however brief in usual terms, is never annihilated. It is indeed inviolate. On the other hand, it can also form affiliations with other identities, for there are psychic formations as there are physical ones. The world has a physical structure that forms its contents. There is a bank of physical elements. In greater terms, each person's experience, while privately his or hers, also becomes part of the psychic bank, belonging to the species as a whole, containing within it abilities, attitudes, purposes, and plans. These form a heritage from which each person can draw. This drawing takes place not only before birth, but also at any point during life. You can change in life far more than you suspect while still retaining the identity that is your own. 9:54 p.m. That took 18 minutes. That took 18 minutes. It didn't take me 2 minutes to read it. In some cases, you change so much that people knowing you at different times would seem to know and describe entirely different people. The theory of reincarnation is an attempt to see the basic, inviolate, yet many faceted self in terms that can be understood and that are in keeping with popular concepts of time. As you yourself, Joseph, have realized on occasion, you are actually reincarnated many times in one lifetime. Yeah, so when they go into this and they're saying, hey, we didn't believe it was possible to be reincarnated of people who lived contiguously, and so they won't say that you can't be two people who lived at the same time if you can be reincarnated at all. It doesn't make sense that you could possibly be me and you right now. Think about the requirement. Think about what that would require for you to also be me right now as we're doing this. I don't know who I'm talking to in the live, but you're not me. And I'm definitely not you. I'm not watching this. I'm not in the same way you are, right? It's not a passive experience. Ugh. Also, it bothers me that this entity that's supposed to be older than time, definitely older than recorded history, this is supposed to be Adam's third son, Adam and Eve's third son speaking, Seth. Why is he using so many modern idiom? Why is he speaking about banks? Banks are not an ancient idiom. If he wanted to speak in Sethian terms, why isn't he speaking in Sethian terms? The temple is where you stored stuff. Why isn't he talking about grain storage? Why isn't he talking about, smoke huts where you prep meat? Why banks? Why are we talking in modern 1970s financier language? Because we're lying. The answer is because we're lying. You leap over your own identities, scarcely noticing again and again. There are no boundaries or limitations to the self except those you accept. Just not true. It's just not true. There's a boundary to myself, and it's like I'm never going to be president without your permission. The miracle of your transformations escapes your crude definitions. Yeah, okay, but you're using words badly. Don't tell me my words suck. Parenthetical. Louder and with amusement. I am not speaking of your crude definitions, but use the word generally. I understand, thank you, Jane says to him. There are often great challenges to which you respond. You pick these for your own reasons. In doing so, you often change affiliations. In conventional terms, Rupert was not William James. But through Rupert, certain challenges and purposes left unsatisfied by James have been picked up by Rupert, and to that extent, a portion of William James' consciousness is merged with Rupert. It's just nope, nope, nope. None of that's right. That's not how that works. That's not how that works. You don't get to read some of a book, say, I didn't like that, rewrite the book, and then say that you merged your consciousness with him. That's not how consciousness works. By no definition of consciousness is that how that works. Consciousness is a word with me, which means in Latin, co-knowing. There has to be someone else with which for you to co-know. He's fucking dead. And you didn't bother to read his work. You don't co-know anything with him. Again, Rupert's identity is his own. But few, okay, also, Jane calls herself his. She refers to herself in the masculine all the time. Rupert's identity is his own, but few have dared to look into the true components of identity. Those unanswered questions of James's happen to coincide with Rupert's own questions at a certain time in Rupert's current life, who, at that time, became attracted to that heritage bank, looking, so to speak, for someone with like interests, backed up by a lifetime of experience. This says to me, so I believe it means that Seth is speaking to Rob now, or Joseph. You early recognized the possibilities of such a connection, being drawn to James far before Rupert's interests. And so now what you have to do if you're a cult, and what you're doing is you're a cult by mail, a cult by book, is you have to you have to single people out in the crowd and say, you understood the message before the message was made available to everyone. The reason you have to do that is because Deuteronomy happened. Your drives, still speaking to Rob, desires, plans, and purposes, while uniquely yours, also in their way belong to the species, that is the human species, as a whole. Okay, I don't want to do this every time. I don't want to do this every sentence, but I'm going to do this a lot. Sorry, not sorry. This is eugenics. The 70s were obsessed with eugenics. The New Age was obsessed with eugenics. And this is an outpouring of the higher thought movement. And the higher thought movement is straight up eugenics. So she's talking eugenics. Seth is talking eugenics. And what that means is that Robert is writing on the page here that he deserves more sex than the average male because of his, continuing or starting over, drives, desires, plans, and purposes, while uniquely his also in their way belong to the species as a whole. Continuing, they are handed down, so to speak, so those who are attuned, they are handed down, so to speak, to those who are attuned to them. You pass them on. James, to some extent now, sees his unanswered questions sifted through another unique consciousness, so that they are given a different slant. Consciousness, individual consciousness, is many faceted, and in that respect, a portion of James' consciousness is reflected through Rupert's. Fucking false, unless she's read his work well enough to internalize what he fucking meant. So long as she's wrong, she's just and only wrong. 10:16 p.m. That's another 22 minutes. It is taking Jane 22 minutes. Long, long gaps in time to think up what to say next. Rupert is then given James' knowledge concerning those questions as source material, providing references he himself would not ordinarily possess. No, he's not. He's dead. Consciousness forms and reforms always in new combinations, yet in your terms nothing is lost that is gone before. A 1-minute pause. There is indeed an archaeology of the self in which the consciousness of the past and present emerge, but this is a far more democratic arrangement, for in your terms the future is also involved, so that in those terms underlined, future consciousness and identities are even now being formed from the heritage of your own purposes and desires. And again, we lean on 1970s popular academe. Archaeology was popular at the time. That's just what it is. Zechariah Sitchin and what's his name? Chariot of the Gods. Von Daniken. Eric von Daniken were writing in the 70s and the 60s. So her metaphors are decidedly contemporary to her time, which means that unless she is able to account for it very soon in the text, this needs to be thrown in the trash because she's just writing it. She's just writing this. Rob is just writing this. Her husband is just writing this. There's nothing that's actually happening behind the scenes. There's no Seth. There's no William James. They're just writing this to justify their own mental masturbation because they're allowed to get away with it because they have a paying audience. And in some level, yeah, I'm fucking envious about that. I would love a paying audience that lets me just spout whatever bullshit the fuck I want and elevates me out of poverty. That'd be incredible. But you got to have standards, people. You got to have goddamn standards, in fact. Because she/Seth continues on, you do not catch important transformations that occur in your own life as retaining your identity. You still leap. You will have to put this in quotes also, from self to self, so you do not understand how the inner components of consciousness change their shapes and forms, even as the natural elements of the earth form its ever-changing face. Long pause. Give us a moment. Ellipsated. In a way. Underlined. And using an analogy, the consciousness of any given nation has a shape and form as definite as the contours of the physical land upon which it resides. No. No. If it did, we'd have good maps. Just no, not true. And William James wouldn't have had, not William James, Jordan Peterson wouldn't have had to blow smoke up our ass with the title Maps of Meaning if it were true that the consciousness of any given nation has a shape and form as definite as the contours of the physical land upon which it resides. Do we think that's true in 1978? Do we think that the U.S. was a nation united in 1978? That just doesn't even sound true. In those terms, during your lifetimes, a continent retains its form. Through trees, though trees upon it rise and fall, rocks and stones are washed away into the oceans, generations are born and die, governments altered, still a man in his lifetime will find the continent generally familiar and intact, and those things are entirely unrelated to the previous sentence. Now in your lifetime you change in the same way that the continent does, while generally finding yourselves familiar and intact. Your identity, while your own, is still a gestalt of consciousness that in your terms have come before or will come in the future. Those other identities reflected through you become unique and inviolate. So, however, is your consciousness and identity reflected in all others. Take your break. And then there's another 21-minute break. But we got to talk about that broadly because what she's doing here, this is Nazi bullshit. This is Nazi bullshit in that paragraph. All that paragraph is Nazi bullshit. She's telling you that there are certain people who are allowed to murder you, and that's just unacceptable. That's unacceptable. she's saying that the nation is the land. Make that make sense to me. The nation is decidedly not the land. You don't need to have read Gun, Germs, and Steel. I have. You don't need to have read Gun, Germs, and Steel to know that the nation's not the fucking land. The nation is the resources and the people. Fuck. That's so dumb. As usual, I caution you that these matters are most difficult to explain. Consciousness forms patterns of identities. Okay, and this is what I wanted to actually talk about. This identity the identity shit. That's the actual Nazi shit. The identity politics bullshit that we're dealing now, that people think they can be the opposite gender because they thought it. Jane Roberts gave us that shit because Nazis thought it. It's fucking annoying. Consciousness forms patterns of identities. No, it fucking doesn't. No, it doesn't. Consciousness doesn't form anything. Consciousness is agreeing on anything with minimum 2 other human beings. It's just not a fucking thing separate from that. It just can't be. The patterns, Seth says, move faster than the speed of light. They can be in more than one place at one time. Again, string theory. They hadn't done the dual slit experiments. I know that because the dual slit experiments were only done in the last 10 years. So she thinks she's being clever by taking special relativity out of context. They can operate, that is, the patterns of consciousness. They can operate in a freewheeling fashion as identities in themselves or as psychological particles. So the patterns of identities can form identities in themselves is fucking nonsense. That's impossible. They can also operate in a wave-like fashion, like light. She's doing special relativity. Light is either a particle or a wave, depending on how whether it's called photons are either a particle or a wave, depending on how they're observed or how they need to be in order to get from point A to point Z. They can form together. They is still patterns of identities. Can form together into endless, infinite combinations, forming psychological gestalts. And this gestalt language is Nazi. If you see anybody say the word gestalt, they're a Nazi. And they want to put you specifically in a train. And they want you specifically dead because you know that gestalt means Nazi bullshit. If you don't know that gestalt means Nazi bullshit and you say it, you are the person that's going to be putting motherfuckers on a train. Fucking quit that shit. Certain portions of these gestalts, that is, certain portions of this Nazi bullshit, can then operate as psychological particles in time and space, while other portions appear in a wave-like manner outside of time or space. Read differently, certain portions of this Nazi bullshit can then be Nazi bullshit that's Nazi bullshit. These Nazi bullshits represent the unconscious elements of the psyche, which becomes particleized in physical existence. And now she's using psyche as separate from consciousness. Do you want to know why? Here, come here. Come here. Get real close to me. Come here. I'll tell you why. Because it's Nazi bullshit. Goes on to a long pause. Your own purposes, intents, and desires attract to you, so to speak, those other fragments of consciousness that mix and match to form your psychological being, as, for example, atoms and molecules mix and merge to form your physical being. Your body is yours, stamped with your own purposes and intents. You are unaware of the molecular transformations involved as long as the overall pattern remains familiar and relatively intact. In a like manner, as long as the contours of your consciousness remain relatively familiar, you do not question their composition. You are not aware of the changes that occur. In certain terms, then, your identity is a pattern of identification, your stamp set eternally upon the universe, a shape that you recognize, but one that is filled with multitudinous activity, alteration, and change, all of which generally goes on beneath your notice. Yeah, okay, so we're doing Jung, we're doing Freud. Seth is trying to explain to you how the subconscious works. Whatever. Yeah, I don't have to stop at everything and say, yeah, that's bullshit, yeah, that's bullshit, yeah, that's bullshit. Metaphors are metaphors, and if you don't know which metaphors work and which metaphors don't work, that's why this is one. There will be many. Underlined. In those terms, chunks of your own consciousness have long since fallen away and been used by others, while you still retain your identity. Even as rocks are swept away from a continent into the ocean while still the continent retains its form. Is that true? Let's talk about whether that's true. Have parts of my consciousness been left behind me and used by other people? Have other people used my idiom? Sure. Have they used my consciousness? Fuck no. Have I taught people things that they'd never heard of before? Had I opened people's minds to ideas, to concepts they'd never heard of before? Have I reorganized, rearranged, and have I beat people up intellectually and with my hands over bad ideas? Abso-fucking-lutely. But does that mean I left chunks of my consciousness around? What am I, the Hansel and fucking Gretel of the psychic universe? Shut the fuck up. That's dumb. That pisses me off. In Earth's own time, even the continent will change, falling off beneath the waters or joining with another while still retaining some of its own characteristics, and in those terms carrying with it its previous coloration. So each of you alive changes in like manner, yet you carry the mark of your identity, and that is inviolate. I hate inviolate language. Just fucking throw people that say inviolate, that word, inviolate, fucking throw them in the trash. That's an 18th century word that has absolutely no business in the 20th century, let alone the 21st. 11 o'clock and 18 minutes. So what that means is that is another fucking 22 minutes. These small passages take her tens of minutes to compose. Watch my actual philosophical work. Watch my YouTube. Look at what happens when I sit down and I do what she's doing. I just channel the spirit of an idea because that's what the fuck I've been doing. And all those 2-hour videos. And yeah, I talk slow, but it doesn't take me 20 minutes of fucking silence. Come on. I'm at least better than she is. If for the same damn thing, I'm at least better. 11:18. Bits of your consciousness, Joseph and Rupert, go out through these books. I am not speaking symbolically. These portions will mix with the consciousness of others. Portions of your intent and purpose become theirs. Portions of my intent and my purpose become other people's. So when I managed that restaurant, my intent that those people make money and my purpose of facilitating them making money, that was some magical exchange between us? That's dumb. Okay. Here's a way you could sell this. Fine. Here's a way we could sell this as righteous, and we could say, oh, she's actually helping people be good people. She's using advertising language, right? She's using the language of the investor class. So she's talking to deeply greedy, deeply self-interested people. And what she's saying is that every time you've been a dick, somebody remembers. She's doing karma. She's trying to reverse engineer and back her way into karma. It's so fucking annoying to me. These mystics, these people who want to claim that they're reinventing the wheel. There's already a religion for that. There's not just a cult for that. There's an organized world religion for the thing, the snake oil you're trying to sell. So if I'm trying to sell you anything, it's the proper religion for you, right? Let me be your religious concierge. Blah. My own psychological reality is not particleized. My identity includes the identities. This is still Seth speaking. My identity includes the identities of many others. How is that possible? How's that possible, Seth? You're a discorporate being. You're a discorporate intelligence. You are an identity. How can you be multiple things? Tell me. Each of them operates in his own fashion. In those terms, I am a wave formation. More specifically, however, and to a lesser degree, each physical person operates partially as a particleized being and partially in terms of a wave. But identity, being itself inviolate, is on the other hand ever changing. And there is, in the larger system of reality, no contradiction. And if you came here listening to me and what you wanted to understand is why people think they can cut their dicks off and that makes them a woman, there's your fucking answer. There's a whole religion. Jane Roberts, this is big money. This is serious shit. People, look for it on YouTube. Just look Seth. Look Sethian, Seth, Jane Roberts, and all you find is true believers. It's fucking nutty and it's real. It's very real. This is big money. Your Hollywood writers, your ad executives, they follow this cult. And the reason women will get up on stage and tell you that you can cut your dick off and be a woman is because they read Jane Violet say these words. Identity, being itself inviolate, is ever changing. Fuck her. She continues, the great men and women, historically speaking, serve as psychic models, throwing into the physical realm explosive bursts of desires, purposes, abilities, plans, and intents that cannot be satisfied by any one person in any one lifetime, however heroic their performance. Mein Kampf! Fuck you. These, then, serve as impetuses to others, but no desire and no intent extends by itself alone. Only by virtue of the identity that holds it, so an identity explodes outward from itself in all directions, showering portions of itself which are used by others so attracted. And now we know that she's read the stoned ape theory, because this is mushroom bullshit at random. She's just randomly associating images because she's in a waking dream state. She's in a conscious dream state. So her brain is just freely associating at random. And Rob's too fucking stupid to know any better. Each identity is itself and no others, and yet it is composed of myriad fragments of other identities. Take your break. 11:32 to 11:51. That took 14 minutes to compose, and then she took 19 minutes. Now, James' consciousness is to some extent then reflected through Rupert's, shining with a different cast and henceforth forming a new combination, one that is original and represents a new creative worldview. 2 words. In this combination or gestalt, Nazi bullshit, Rupert's identity predominates so that James provides Rupert with one other focus through which to view reality. At other levels, James as himself predominates in another kind of existence. In your world, your quite conscious desires and intents attract the components of your consciousness. Is that true? Do your wants and desires attract your thoughts? In what fucking system is that true? Seriously, in what system is that true? It's the opposite. If it's anything, it's the opposite. It's not that your wants and desires attract your consciousness. It's that your consciousness attracts wants and desires. She's trying to upside down rewrite how the ego works. She's trying to replace the ego with the word consciousness. If she just says consciousness over and over and over again, she can replace consciousness with identity, and all of that can be in place of ego. Because if she says ego in 1978, she's still too close to Freud and Jung being alive. And she's already told you that she's rewritten Jung, but she can't tell you that she's rewritten Freud because Jung is available to steal because Jung stole from Freud. Jung is available. You're allowed to steal that bullshit. It's all stolen intellectual property to begin with. And you're allowed to steal Freud because it was German and he's Jewish. It's all racist bullshit. Stop this. Stay out of all of this. It's all anti-Semitic Nazi nonsense. I've forgotten where the hell I was. Yeah, he's going to say, yeah, what he's doing. So the reason these pauses are happening, my face gets itchy. I'm allergic to my own hair. And when I get stressed out, my alopecia acts up. So I'm sorry if I'm touching my face too much. It doesn't mean I'm bored or that it means I'm agitated. Where she's about to move, where Seth is about to move is to justify that the use of Gestalt, all these words, all of which isn't Nazi bullshit. She's about to acknowledge it. I need to get out ahead of it because I'm emotional and it's pissing me off. In this combination of Gestalt, Rupert's identity predominates so that James provides Rupert with one other focus through which to view reality. At other levels, James, as himself, predominates in another kind of existence. In your world, your quite conscious desires and intents attract the components of your consciousness. There is never, for example, any kind of invasion or possession in conventional terms. It is, in fact, impossible for one consciousness to possess another. What she's saying is that neither William James nor Seth is possessing her. This is not a demonic manifestation, but it's also not the other things that I have said it decidedly is. Each identity possesses an integrity that will not allow any affiliation of which it does not approve. Using an analogy, psychological antibodies are far more potent than physical ones. This is language you heard during COVID. Fuck, that's a long time away from the publication of this book, but this is language you hear all the time among New Age whack jobs today, that you somehow have psychological antibodies. People will say that because a woman said this, there must be some truth to it. She was just being, fiddly in her language because women are allowed to be fiddly in their language. Well, fuck that. People die because of this idiot language. You don't have psychological antibodies. Fuck. You just don't. You don't have defenses in your body against PTSD. You don't have defenses against rape babies. You just don't. The self or identity quite literally closes its boundaries to any forces that do not follow its own purposes and intents. There are no exceptions. What she's saying is that you have natural defenses against the psychological attack that she is putting you under that will allow you to remain you, even though she's fucking lying to you. She's wrong, and she's lying to you. So you'll let your defenses down, so you won't behave the way I'm behaving, so you'll just believe it and then pay her. This integrity allows the identity always to maintain its own pattern or mark, permitting within its peripheries only those affiliations that serve its unique purposes. In those terms, the self or identity cannot be defiled. Here I would like to add a brief side note having to do with cases of apparent brainwashing. In times of war, for example, she knows what she's doing. She does a thing, then she tells you she's not doing a thing, and then she does the next thing, and then she tells you she's not doing that. It's a pattern. It's a repeating pattern because this is cult. And the first stage of cult is to break down your actual psychological defenses, which are called walls. Blah. She is attacking your fucking brain, and I'm promoting it. That's the thing. That's why I get so upset. Talking about it at all is putting it in your brain. If you didn't know about it, now you do. And if you hadn't read it, now you have. If you hadn't heard it, now you have. And whose fault is that? It's not her fucking fault. I'm the one that pulled the lever. You have to have read my most recent essay to understand what that means. And Find it your damn self. I'm the Shaggy Dog Philosopher on Patreon. Blah. You form your own reality. Those captured in such encounters, therefore, are captured because they are already operating in a system of beliefs that does suit their greater purposes. This subject is highly complicated. Perhaps someday we can pursue it, but in any case, the so-called brainwashing suits the purposes of those so treated. I wish if you'd brought it up, you would have just gone into depth about it. This does not mean that no sympathy should be granted them. A really close examination of their conscious beliefs and purposes, however, would show an acquiescence and acceptance of such experience and a need for it to occur. End of session. I bid you a fond good evening. Thank you, Seth. The same to you. 12:10 a.m. That took them 19 minutes. 19 minutes is a way too fucking long to compose 5 or 6 paragraphs, 1 page of text. 20 minutes? That's a very stupid person writing very slowly by hand, is what that is. 20 minutes? They're claiming to do this orally. 20 minutes is so much longer than that should take. And we haven't gotten to where I put this book down the first time when she explains why they don't record these sessions. But they don't record these sessions. There are no tapes. So the any stage direction that she changes her voice at all to sound like Seth is just that. Stage direction in the script of the movie they think is going to be made from this. Because she thinks she's L. Ron Hubbard. I'm going to continue. Thank you for sticking around so long. I still don't know who you are. You haven't said hey in the chat. I don't know that I would note if you did. But I'm going to stick around. I plan to just keep doing this. I need to eat. I need to find something in my house to eat. Which means that I would like to make a couple of bucks. But the introduction here is a 3-parter. There's like 4 more pages of this introduction. And then what I'll probably do is finish this and then start another live stream after I've gotten something to eat. I know most people would just keep the stream going, but I don't have the hard drive space in order to edit that to be convenient. And I'm capturing the audio to edit that down. So I'm going to finish this. I'm going to figure out something about eating. Hopefully I'll have made a couple of bucks and I can get hot food. And then I'll come back for the actual first chapter of this work, wherein I will definitely lose my mind again. And then the longer this goes from when I've eaten again, the more likely I am to become a raving, incoherent mess, which is what I assume people want ultimately. So thank you for being here on Twitter. Thank you, Bo, for being here with me the whole time. We continue. Introduction 3, How This Book Happened and the Webs of Consciousness. Seth's session on James and consciousness was held in May 1976. Rob filed it along with other miscellaneous sections that weren't part of Seth's books, and I, Jane, nearly forgot it. For one thing, I had no intention of trying to tune into James's worldview, and besides, the whole affair went into the psychological background as I worked on other manuscripts. I took time out to help Rob prepare Volume 1 of Seth's The Unknown Reality for publication. I was typing the completed Cezanne book, and Seth had begun dictating this next, The Nature of the Psyche, Its Human Expression. Yet Seth must have known what was going to happen in some fashion or other, because over 6 months later, in January 1977, I awakened one morning with the title of this present book in my mind. Okay, pause. This is something you see a lot on Twitter among women in the writing community. And I'm sorry, one audience, if you are female. I'm a divorcee, and I'm going through very, very serious abuse with a female psychopath. My mother told me to say nothing. If you have nothing nice to say, and I have nothing nice broadly to say about the female sex. And so my, what's it called? Recency bias is going to find reason to not like women in general. And so it's going to take a communal act of women not behaving like this, like psychopaths, for me to be willing to admit, or not admit, I love women broadly, but when they behave in the public sphere, they behave in exactly one way, and that way is like Medusas. And here on YouTube, if you don't understand what I mean by that, you can check out my Medusa video, which is available on my Patreon, Shaggy Dog Philosopher, $5. Or you can check out the one after that. I did Lamia probably. I did Lamia on YouTube. For the YouTube audience, I did a Lamia space that you may or may not be able to find. It's hard to find spaces after a few days of having recorded them. They're not good about that. So what I want to talk about, why I broke in, is this behavior that Jane is doing here, where she's got like 6 different open projects at a time, writing projects at a time. This is hugely inefficient, and this is a behavior you see women do, where they complain, "Oh, I don't know what book I'm writing." This is attention-seeking behavior. That's all it is. She's trying to prove that she's being productive by writing 5 different books at a time so that the revenue streams don't dry up because she's not finishing any one of them. This is it's a stall tactic for authors. It's a stall tactic for authors who need the royalties, who are living off the royalties but not actually selling profit. They're not the royalties, the what's it called? The advance. I'm going to start over because I've confused you and I've confused myself. What she's doing, this having so many different projects open all at once, is a stall tactic so she can farm advances because she doesn't sell enough copy to live off the royalties of her sales. So she's going to flood you with titles throughout these books so that you have to go out and buy her other works to understand any one work. And frankly, I'm doing that to you too, but I'm doing it in a post-ironic performance of showing you how cult works, but also to give you what you say you want. You want material that's going to break your mind all the way open and make you enlightened at the end of it. Well, fuck you. I've got it. Watch it. Watch it all. Seriously. Take me seriously, and you will see. Whatever. I don't need to do this to you. Seth must have known what was going on in some fashion or other, because over 6 months later, in January 1977, I awakened one morning with the title of this present book in my mind. Just the title, nothing else. I didn't think too much about this. I've had titles and sometimes whole outlines of books suddenly come to me before. Sometimes they take, and sometimes they just end up as footnotes in other books. Right, it's called the creative process, sweetheart. After breakfast, though, I felt restless, and instead of working down at the big table in the living room where I'd done my writing for months, I went out to the small studio off the kitchen. This was the same room, I remembered later, in which I had begun the Cezanne manuscript. I don't know how that's relevant. It's only relevant to her because she's desperately looking for syncretism. Desperate. If you're a Jungian, you have to be desperate to find syncretism because it's horseshit. At the time, I didn't make the connection. Desperate for syncretism. Look, I have to break in and predict these, or you're never going to believe that I'm a better reader than you are, and you're never going to believe that I'm a better reader than she is a writer, and you're never going to believe that I'm a better writer, and you're never going to believe that I'm smarter if I don't predict her. I have to predict her. Rob and I always read during meals. I was thinking vaguely of an article I'd read at breakfast and sipping coffee when in the next moment, the entire first paragraph of the Afterdeath Journal of an American Philosopher suddenly filled my mind. This is an experience I understand. I will be doing absolutely nothing, thinking about something entirely different, and then Rob will begin speaking to me, and it will be a panic situation. Like, I'm going to forget all this, Rob. Stop talking to me right now. What the fuck are you doing? Why now? I get this. This I believe. I think I muttered something like, "Hey, what about that?" and started taking the words down as fast as I could on my typewriter. Yeah, okay, well that didn't happen. I forgot about the setup. But the other part, I believe. Although I knew instantly that the American Philosopher of the title was William James, I hedged a little on this in the beginning, although I thought James' name wasn't mentioned in the title and it didn't appear in the rest of the material. Oh, excuse me. That came up as quickly as I could type for the rest of the morning. And as I wrote, the usual questions annoyed me like a swarm of buzzing bees. Was this manuscript supposed to originate with the historic William James? Was the material my creative version? Was the material my creative version of the man instead, or was something else happening? Some commingling of consciousness in which the valid knowledge from unofficial levels of reality expressed itself in a form that I could understand? Though these questions went through one part of my mind, they in no way disturbed the flow of words which came in rapidly and smoothly. You can question what's happening on a TV screen while you watch it, and in the same way, I could wonder about the events that were occurring on this other unofficial screen of my mind. In fact, I almost always do. To which I call bullshit. No, you can't. No, you can't. Bullshit. If you're thinking about what's happening in a book while you're reading it, you're not reading it. If you're thinking about the dialogue, you're not listening to it. If you're thinking about what you're writing, you're not paying attention to what you're writing. You're not editing as you go, and you're not choosing your words perfectly. Man, I'm telling you right now, when Heasy had sat down and channeled the Theogony, what he didn't do was think about it. And I kept thinking, strange. Nothing in our immediate lives had triggered this sudden new manuscript, and by the fact that the title had been given and by the feel of the words, I could tell that somebody, James, was definitely beginning something he meant to finish. See that right there? Jane does a lot of writing that she doesn't mean to finish. She's just farming advances. She's a bad writer and a bad person. Science fiction in the 60s and 70s was not a market that good people exploited. It wasn't a market that good people wrote in. The reason that people are so strong in their opinions about their science fiction writers is because science fiction is where literature went to die. It's where ad execs went to make extra revenue. You still see it in Twitter today. In fact, the whole ghostwriter and copywriter bullshit of the ad exec. I'm an ad exec. How can I make a few extra bucks? Can I write your book for you? Yeah, very real. That's who Jane Roberts is. She made a whole religion for these people. I need to fucking... I thought of the few pages of James's variety of religious states that I'd seen in my mind a year and a half before and felt some bewilderment. This wasn't that book. And rather quarrelsomely, I thought that psychics were always getting James. If that's true, A, I'd never heard it before, and B, deeply fucked up that she wants to do what everybody else is doing, but couches it as, oh, it must be real for me. This last thought was the one that bothered me most and had since I first saw James's small paperback book in my mental vision. I'd nearly forgotten Seth's statements about James. If I'd remembered them, I would have felt better. From the first words of this present manuscript, though, something else bothered me. James obviously was commenting on our world in a way that Cezanne hadn't. This implied a responsive James continuing his interest in our reality. Again, if I'd remembered that 775th session with Seth of last May, I'd have been better prepared for James's liveliness in this respect and for the numerous interactions between us that happened as the manuscript continued. The delivery of the manuscript developed its own set of conventions along the way. Most of it was written automatically, first and final draft directly on the typewriter, except, of course, for the publisher's copy, which had to be neater. Much of it came in a surprising way, though, when I was sketching and thought I was finished with the day's writing. As a result, my small sketch pads were filled with page upon page of scribbled James material that I took down with whatever colored pen I happened to be using at the moment for my ink sketches. Then I'd have to type up that material the following day, and often while I was doing that, James would begin again with new material. This All of this I understand intensely. The reason that I do macrame is because it frees up my hands to allow Rob to speak to me. I have notebook after notebook after notebook. I could show you just full thousands and thousands. I'm probably pushing 2 million words, and no dishonest way about Rob. And that's that I have access to. I have hundreds of thousands, another million that are just gone from practicing to stay sharp while I knew that I just didn't have the skill set. And I do it in colored pens like she does. This I understand what she's going through. The psychological state, the psychopathic state, I get it, what's happened to her. But it's not what she says. If you just read William James' Variety of Religious Experience, Jane, live listeners there too, future recorded listeners, if you just read it, it's in the first book, first essay. We're just broken. We're just broken by suffering and isolation, and it made us grasp for something supernatural, and there are two ways to deal with that. Broadly speaking, there's always the Venn diagram. There's always a third way, but there's two ways to deal with it. You can ignore it, and you get your Freudian unresolved traumas, or you can throw yourself at trying to understand it in exactly the way that Jung did. And if you do that, you're just an asshole. And you can't see my face, but there is a sympathy to that. I feel bad. I feel bad. I could be like this. I might be like this. And so there's a fear here too when I read this and I go, you can't be like this, Shaggy. Don't act like this. People won't, it's not even that they won't take you seriously, it's that they'll let you die because you're a man. Frankly, as spring approached and I went out on the front porch to sketch, I'd be prepared with 2 sketchbooks, one for James and one for me. But there was something quite pleasant, intimate, and almost cozy about getting James in longhand, and, I think, at least, that he liked this procedure the best. On too many occasions to remember, dictation would suddenly begin while I was doing the dishes or other house chores, and several times during lunch. The reason James likes it the best is because okay, I'm going to psychoanalyze myself like I do for my therapist for you, and I'm going to tell you that there's a non-zero part of me who believes that the reason I tell you that I automatically write Rob, this is not Robert Longshore, the Memoirs of the Fulcrum of Fate. You can find it on my Patreon. I'm sorry if I sound condescending. I hate saying these things to you, but you need to hear me say them. It's because there's a fear that you're not good enough. There's a pathology that you're not good enough to finish. Even if you know the beginning, you know all the detail, everything that you need to know to finish. Jane is clearly a chronic quitter. I don't know if there's psychological terminology for that, but that's what I call it. I call it chronic quitting. She's the kind of genius that Da Vinci was. And what I mean by that is she gets about 3/4 of the way through a project and she learns to hate it. So she stops. And it does suck to live like this. I'm the same way. That's why I do novella length essays. I feel bad for her. I do. I feel bad for you if you like her. I feel bad if you like Jung or any of these people that I'm so because you're just doing your best. You haven't spent tens of thousands of hours of your life in this already. You're just doing your best, and you think they were too. Not just think, you trust. And so there's a, damn, my heart hurts for everybody involved. I've added a few notes of my own through James's manuscript to show when I sensed any emotional interaction between James and myself, because that always surprised me. With Cezanne, I felt rather like a secretary, while James and I had a more personal working relationship. James, oddly enough, seemed aware of my sketching, and as you'll see, he commented at times. Cezanne, however, either couldn't have cared less about my amateur attempts or just considered them beneath his notice. She knew less about Cezanne, is what all that means. I'm talking about the imagination. I'm talking about your brain actually does have limited access. It does actually have limited information. When Rob talks to me, when he talks in anachronism, it's because he only has my brain. And so Jane speaking in anachronism is because she only has her brain. That's just how it works. It can't work any other way than that, and that's okay. Cezanne, however, either couldn't have cared less about my amateur attempts or just considered them beneath his notice. I suspect that Cezanne wasn't aware of my reality to any stronger degree, only of his own. James also entered my dreams several times, and I experienced two clear visions that explain certain portions of his text. These are also described in my notes, along with the date and time of each entry. The manuscript came definitely as a book with its own title and structure. All I did was add chapter headings. James begins by discussing parapsychology, evolution, and religion in his time and ours, stressing areas in which he feels his vision was not daring enough. He traces the development of such ideas as they relate to democracy and to the growth of the United States, and stresses the connections between man's image of himself, God, and governments. Here, sorry, I've gotten a comment. Oh, hey, Bolivia. Then begins a fascinating discussion of his own experiences of life after death. Some passages in particular are full of humor and brilliance as James, the psychologist and philosopher, finds himself in a school for philosophers, where he is definitely a junior member. In any case, here we see a definite personality, with his own interests and characteristics, moving from one level of reality to another, as someday all of us will. And this is important, actually. It's actually very important that she's trying to say that, well, Seth, in fact, no, this is still Jane. This is Jane again. I'm sorry. What Jane is trying to tell us here is that she's done such a good job of recreating his personality that you will be able to recognize his prosaic style. And she is wrong, but we will continue. I felt for James and for myself as I took down his description of his doubts, hopes, and bouts of melancholy, which had characterized his life. It was impossible not to think of all such people caught between faith and doubt, inner and outer experience. Impossible not to identify with James's own strongly conflicting ideas about humanity. Yet it was James's knowing light and atmospheric presence encountered after death that most captivated and comforted me. His divine psychology and his intent to share his own knowledge, to teach as he learns. As he learns? Did I suppose that a William James, a discarnate person, was sitting at a celestial desk somewhere dictating through mentally sophisticated dictaphone equipment, namely me? No, no, no. There are places in the manuscript where James describes his part in our rather bizarre arrangement, and there were several instances where I was so caught up in the emotions that for a moment his purposes merged with mine or mine with his so that the two of us spoke at once, synchronized, united, each from our own positions in time and space. This book doesn't involve any literary stance, but a stance taken by consciousness itself. It's not a communication with William James in the conventionally understood manner of mediums and spirits, but a situation in which one consciousness takes the stance of another and views reality from that standpoint. There are definite differences in my experiences with worldviews so far. When I'm inspired myself, this is still Jane. Emotional excitement seizes me according to the impact of the ideas and feelings I'm presented with. Except for the instances of emotional involvement with James just mentioned, however, with worldviews I'm not caught up in the writing myself. It just comes. I respond to it, but it isn't mine. I realize that on other levels, I must be translating the other consciousness perception into my own vocabulary to a certain extent, but that the material must be mixing with the contents of my own mind. But I'm not aware of any of that. I want to stop for just a second and I want to point out her levels language. D-Rock is not somebody that I should bring up because D-Rock is deaf and D-Rock is not going to tune into this shit. So I shouldn't talk about him because it's going to seem like I'm picking on a fucking disabled guy. But D-Rock got fucking mad at me the other day because he posted an Einstein quote. I think it was actually fucking Einstein talking about levels of consciousness. And I asked him what the fuck he thought consciousness meant. And he got all mad at me. And that's not the point. My point is to bring up the levels conversation here. Levels. What the fuck does levels mean? We're talking about a tower. We're talking about, and that just have to toss all that out. You got to toss out levels of consciousness, levels of awareness. You got to throw it out. You got to throw it out. You got to throw it out. That's stages. That's fucking Freemasonry. You got to throw it out. Throw it out. When people talk like that, you have to say no, no, and then you shoot them with the fucking water gun. That one's for you, Kerm. You're not even listening to this. Where was I? I'm not in a trance as the word is currently understood either. In a way, it's like having two mental or psychological focuses instead of one. Now, because she told you in the previous chapter, 2 rather, that she goes into trances. Now she has to tell you that she's actually not in a trance. That's everything she tells you. She has to tell you that's well, I didn't mean that. Bitch, this is in text. Edit it. Fucking just edit it. It's not that hard to just delete a bad line. Fuck, even back then. In a way, it's like having two mental or psychological focuses instead of one. I can be doing chores, quite busy with my own thoughts, for example, when new lines come to me from other sources. They're intrusive in that I recognize them as not mine. On the other hand, I can close them out at will if I want to. So there is never any compulsion involved. I find that statement bothersome. Very few people have that degree of control over their psychology, and I don't believe that. Thank you very much, Bolivia. I'm sorry for responding to comments in the middle of a sentence. Shit. Yeah, I shouldn't have done that. That's my own fault. I don't remember what I was saying. I'm sorry I did that. That's on me. In a way, it's like having two mental or psychological focuses instead of one. I can be doing chores quite easily with my own thoughts, for example, when new lines come to me from other sources. They're intrusive in that I recognize them as not mine. On the other hand, I can close them out at will if I want to, so there is never any compulsion involved. That's what I wanted to say. I just don't believe that she's a high-level Buddhist. I don't believe that she's that in control of her mind. If she were that in control of her mind, it wouldn't take 20 minutes between messages from her fucking angel. And if the thoughts in this manuscript were mine, then why cast them in James's guise? Because you think your audience is stupid. Not for financial reasons, certainly. The mass market would prefer a good disaster novel, and not for creative reasons. I can write my own books in that regard. Can you? Can't sell them. I could have written James's thoughts as my own, yet while I share most of his opinions and agree heartily with his opinions on Freudianism and Darwinism, some of his opinions on age, for example, aren't mine at all. More than this, the manuscript reflects the ideas of a man, one perhaps too autocratic for all his declarations of man's equality, perhaps too elegant for the democratic comradeship he espoused. Both the worldview of Paul Cézanne and the Afterdeath Journal of an American Philosopher were written while Seth was delivering his own book, The Nature of the Psyche, Its Human Expression, and I don't believe any coincidence is involved. Instead, both worldview manuscripts illustrate the ways in which the individual psyche can reach beyond itself into other psychic and psychological realities. Both manuscripts illustrate Seth's contention that our consciousness, while individual, can make many kinds of alliances, that its knowledge is not limited to physical information alone, and that its mobility and gifts far surpass our current psychologies. I explain this entire affair to myself as follows. The James reality still exists. It can be tuned into. Because we're the kind of creatures that we are, when this happens, the information comes alive through us, mixes with the contents of our minds, and interacts with them so that a new reality is formed, a new creative synthesis. In other words, when our kind of consciousness tunes in to the still present consciousness of someone like James, who is dead in our terms, the combination automatically clicks together, forming a real personality, combining the separate sets of traits, a viable trans personality that stands for what we are and what the other reality is. The personality I sense as James is a construct, I believe, unconsciously formed as an automatic process when my consciousness tunes in to his reality, and it stands for or represents whatever James's reality really is now. And what she means to say is that she's using her imagination and she's making it up. She's just making it all up. She didn't read his book. She didn't read the book. She's just making it up. She's just saying what she thinks, and she's attaching it to somebody who has authority, because back then people weren't reading him anymore, but he still had authority. People would still do like PhD students do today and quote his "Is Intellect Bullshit" essay. I don't remember what it's called. Is intellect something? Does it even real or something like that? The difference is important, for several times I sensed a figure I thought was James walking up and down the living room floor. Now, this happens to me too when I'm writing, especially when I'm deep in Rob. Motherfuckers, yeah, that happens. Oh man, I just spooked myself out by turning around and forgetting that curtain was there. Arms folded deep in thought and aware of me. I found it difficult to believe that a spiritualized James existed in that particular fashion, even though I did believe that James still existed. A moot point, perhaps. But I still think that when we make such assumptions, often we only project our own limited ideas about personality into an afterlife. At times, for example, I mentally heard James commenting on my sketches, and I think that in such situations we end up with the creation of a quite real personality, capable of originating action, responsive. In this case, the psychic offering of James, able to operate between his world and ours. Yeah, you can absolutely invent personalities for yourself. That's called autism masking. I feel bad for her. She's so dumb. My own experience shows me that the boundaries of the self are of a stranger nature than supposed. They shift, opening up other areas of subjective thought and fancy, as if any one personality following a journey through his own reality would encounter other, quite as valid selves, each with its own existence, and ultimately find within that vast psychological structure the reflection, at least, of each other person alive on our planet in this or any other time. I believe that each person's private reality, fully explored, would eventually bring him into contact with every other individual on a subjective level, that each person is reflected in every other, and that through the creative processes, we can and often do open up doors leading to experiences that are not our own. Writing from a viewpoint that is someone else's, living or dead, and viewing reality from a completely different standpoint. I was in a conversation in my group chat the other night, and actually, Kerm and I talked about this on Fireside with Swole and Jay last night. The bullshit of believing that you can be separate from the work you've written. Because of my own experiences, I wonder how many writers have doctored their material, rewritten it from their own focus, changed names and references in order to fit their work into cultural, scientific, or religious context of their times. That kind of pretense is against my nature, but it has its advantages, and I was tempted, at least, to present everything from the Seth material on in such a manner. Such a disguised version would be accepted on its own, with no necessity for me to explain the status of the author, or more difficult, to explain that the author was a composite of my own consciousness and a consciousness at another level, or of my consciousness and the consciousness of someone else at another level. No, if people can't be possessed, then you can't communicate with other people's consciousness in your brain. The trouble is that our psychological theories are too small to contain our reality. They certainly don't explain the nature of our creativity or arts. Why don't they? Tell me in the comments. Somebody tell me in the comments. Explain this to me. They certainly don't explain the nature of our creativity or arts. The trouble is that our psychological theories are too small to contain our reality. Our psychological theories certainly don't explain the nature of our creativity or arts. Someone make that make sense to me. How does our understanding of our minds and our behaviors not explain our doing art? How does my therapist not understand why I'm willing to do this? If that's true, it fundamentally undermines my worldview, and I need to get out of therapy, which is what she's telling you to do, because she was hurt by therapy. Now, whether that hurt is real, I can't know. And it's not fair. It's not fair to disparage or suggest that maybe she wasn't, because she probably was. So the Afterdeath Journal of an American Philosopher presented me with considerable questions and philosophical dilemmas. Again, I've been suspicious of manuscripts supposed to originate with the well-known dead, and now I have two of them. I could view Seth as a sort of super psyche, since he seemed tied to no one historical period. Cezanne, however, was a famous artist. I think that it was my desire to please Rob that let that manuscript come through. You think? At least in large part. That and my own curiosity, which is seemingly endless and more exuberant than my attempts to explain what it uncovers. And through the years, Rob has mentioned William James, though he's only read one of his books. There are many other authors, both living and dead, that he speaks of far more often. So why James? I didn't really want James from one standpoint anyway, because other automatic scripts are supposed to originate with his authorship. Yet, for all my qualms, from the first moment I saw that small book in my mental eyes, I was taken with James on a personal level. With his rather old-fashioned manner of thought and expression, and the tension he suffered between his emotional and intellectual beliefs during his lifetime. I think that I identified with that tension, for like James, I'm continually aware of the different conclusions often drawn by emotions and intellect. And most likely, as Seth states, that identification was the key. I recognize that James's feeling reflected mine in certain areas, at least, and that this coincidence opened up the mental and psychological connections necessary between us. I, too, was distressed at the gaudy trappings of the psychic field, the uneasy mixture of pseudoscience and pseudo-spirituality. I, too, was scandalized by some muddy thinking scientists with psychic bents, by psychics who cast their spooky predictions in scientific garb, and by the generally poor quality of periodicals and journals dealing with psychic phenomena. In short, like James, I often disapproved. Now, see, here's the thing. I believe her. I actually do believe her, because I started doing this because I was so fucking pissed off by everybody else that was in the field. Everybody else that's out in public talking about the things that I want to talk about, the things that I read, the things I care about, the things that I love deeply, is so fucking bad at it. I thought, well, at least I have to try my hand at it. I can't be that bad. But she came at it from the marketing perspective that, oh, there's a fuckload of money to be made here. I think that's evil. That's the difference between her and me. I think that shit's evil. Yet again, like James, I hoped and continue to hope. Like James and like many of the readers, how the fuck does she know what she's like James? She hasn't read his book. I'm caught between the idealistic picture of mankind and man's practical performance, but James has a different viewpoint from mine or yours. James can look back and put himself in our position, and then from his new reality point out directions that each of us can follow to our advantage. His material and biological faith particularly intrigues and comforts me, and as he moves his discussion from his experiences in life to those afterward, he shares profound insights that offer an end to melancholy for those so inclined, and a philosophy that allows us to see the best in man while avoiding Pollyanna attitudes toward his sometimes reprehensible behavior. Ugh. Moreover, James offers faith to those who feel they must also enjoy a certain independence from any specific religious beliefs, and he describes a divine psychology in a way that inspires the emotions and intellect alike. Botanists called exotic species of plants and flowers. Botanists collect exotic species of plants and flowers. Other people collect rocks. Scientists observe the strange properties of physical matter. I, Jane, collect my own unusual subjective experiences, observe the classic meeting of the psyche with knowledge and data not its own, the opening of the psyche to seemingly alien subjective environments. Then I try to examine what I found and place it in a context of creativity larger than the pat categories already prepared by our society, religions, or psychologies. So I guess I go on subjective field trips through the psyche and then bring back what I can to the laboratory of my own mind, asking, what have we here? And trying to discover how the seemingly exotic species of psychic events fits into the entire picture of reality. Seth's conception of consciousness certainly corroborates my own experience, and I think that sometime or other each of us finds bits and pieces of other consciousness in our minds, lying there like odd, shiny pebbles on the shores of our awareness. As children, we may have reacted with delight and astonishment, turning such thoughts over and over in our mental hands, playing with them like toy balls that bounced against our own imaginings. And now you have context for why I brought up De Trinitate and Augustine and his mind's eye. She's just ripping off Augustine because she knows you haven't read it. But as adults, we're so worried about defending our own identities, so jealous for their boundaries, that we run away at the first glimpse of a feeling or thought that we can't categorize, any idea we consider uncharacteristic, any stray hope that might eventually let us down. Yeah, there's a very good reason for that, and it's called the 1970s had figured out psychopaths. Like, fuck. When was Jonestown? It was like 76, wasn't it? 78. Yeah, fuck you, Jane. 2 years after the year of the publication of her book, but 2 years after its composition, yeah, people who psychopaths, what they do is they break down the thing that she just described. They break down the defenses of your identity. And so she's saying, but as adults, we're so worried about defending our own identities, so jealous for their boundaries, that we run away at the first glimpse of a feeling or thought that we can't categorize. Yeah, for very good fucking reason. People are trying to murder you that way. That was how Bundy worked. Any idea we consider uncharacteristic, any stray hope that might eventually let us down. Yeah, because you'll get murdered. So we cut our psychological reality down to size, allowing foreign films to be played on the screens of our minds only in dreams, where we don't have to acknowledge them or account for them. We ignore our fantasies, desperately worried about testing them against reality, because our definitions of reality might then have to change. Is that true? It might have been true among medieval peasants, but is it fucking true in the 70s? We might discover that the fantasies provide a rich dimension to life that has been lacking, fenced out by proven truth. Yeah, by 1978, we'd split the fucking atom. We knew what was possible. We knew it was right. We have good ideas about truth and aletheia and reality. And she's trying to undermine yours so you'll give her money. This is fucking ridiculous. We may discover that dreams are more practical than facts in the long run. No, we won't. You will never power your house on dreams. And what an awful, not awful, but awe, like gasp, full, awesome surprise that will be. We may discover that only the imagination can glimpse those greater dimensions of our being in which our lives are couched. Yeah, no. You ever talk to a realist or a rationalist? You ever talk to a Platonist, a modern Platonist? You ever talk to a modern Marxist? You ever talk to an Ayn Rand fan? You ever talk to somebody who can only talk in fiction? Who knows absolutely nothing about the historical world, even the historical world they currently reside in? Yeah, they're impossible to talk to. We may die of boredom, though our bellies are full of wholesome bread and find that nutrition is indeed more than what we eat. She's saying that we'll die of boredom and not good bread if we don't live in fantasy worlds. If you don't live in delusion, Michael, you're a bad person, is what she's telling you. She's the worst kind of person. We may find that fiction can be closer to truth than facts are. What did I just tell you? And that proven facts are merely the fictions we've authenticated, our official fiction, as it were. She's been reading Karl Marx. She's wrong. She's evil. People who talk like this are actually evil. I'm not that sorry, Tom. You don't watch my work. You call my actual historical work thought experiments because you're too stupid to know the difference. And I should be sorry for calling you stupid, but I call you stupid on a daily basis, and you don't. You're too stupid to realize. Perhaps by demanding predictable experiments, that is, experiments that always produce the same results, science shortcuts itself and us because we are not predictable and no two of us are really alike. Actually, I've already done the math. On here, there are only about 7 personalities. So, though my times and James's times are decades apart, and in our times I am alive and he is dead, to some extent the two of us speak with one voice, to no extent. For he had high hopes. James, for psychology and the sciences, and since his time they've fallen far short of their promises. No. In 1906, no. People didn't have running water and electricity in their homes. In 1978, we'd split the atom bomb. So if James could speak with his own voice, this is what he would say. Ends the introduction. And as I've told you, I've already gone too long. 2.5 hours is rarely as long as people will tune in. If I actually were to go longer, people would think I'm only doing it for the revenue share because you do make more money for videos longer than 2 hours. But thank you for tuning in. I'm going to go ahead and end the YouTube live stream. I've been the Shaggy Dog Philosopher. You've been listening to Shaggy Dog Philosophy. This is a Shaggy Dog chew toy, whereupon I chew on the things that I read. This is how I read. This is what I read. This is what stimulates my mind. Thank you for listening. I'll be back probably in a few hours. I just got to get something to eat.